tell she, remember Mr. Robbie, met an empty vault. I tired hear that. So, I tired hear that. She bought it. I'm an old woman, been through plenty pain. All I understand is the country going down the drain. If you hear Granny bought Tony. How much more they want me to be? She said, I take and I take, I fed up to hear. How much more they want me to be? Sparrow come and shoo in the air. How much more they want me to be? He said to get a shakonia, scrape me on here. How much more they want me to be? First I sorry I moved here and then from there. How much more they want me to be? Every night I kneel down, I say a prayer. How much more they want me to be? I'm begging them please just vacate that chair. How much more they want me to be? Granny, look careful what you're saying here. How much more they want me to be?
Because he has set his love upon me, therefore will I deliver him.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to the Curator's Lodge, a property of the St. Vincent and the Grenadines National Trust, for those of you who don't know. This afternoon, while I welcome you to this session, I would not be chairing this session. We have Dr. Doris Charles, a member of the National Trust Board of Trustees, who will be doing that for you shortly. We are anticipating two persons to do some presentations. We are going to move forward in the next 5 minutes. If they're not here, we are going to have the start of the ceremony, which will recognize the launching of this particular text by Dr. Fergus. So in the next 5 minutes, we are going to begin.
Because he has set his love upon me, therefore will I deliver him. I will set him on high, because he has known my name. He shall call upon me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver and honor him. With long life will I satisfy him and show my salvation.
The workers of iniquity dig a pit for me. Now they're waiting for me to fall in. Trying to take me bread and butter with lies and propaganda. But they're fooling, they're only fooling. I will not be afraid of what man can do to me. Man, you see, is only vanity. You see, who God bless, no man curse. He shall never hunger and thirst. Who God bless, no man shall ever curse. He shall be first. He shall be first. Ah, Lord. Whoa. All these years of toil, burning the midnight oil. The foundation is for now till thy kingdom come. You see, who God bless no man curse. He shall never hunger or thirst. Who God bless no man shall ever curse. He shall be first. He shall be first.
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, on behalf of the National Trusts of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I want to extend a very special welcome to all of us at the Against Toleration book launch written by Dr. Claudius Fergus. Before we go any further, I want us to please stand as we offer a word of prayer, as well as to sing the national anthem of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. God our Father, we thank you for this opportunity to attend this book launch. The book having been inspired and written by Dr. Fergus. We thank you, Jesus, for allowing us the opportunity to see this day so that we can further understand some of the things that have shaped our lives as modern day so-called Vincentians. I firmly believe that the essence of this evening's presentation is to inform us and to encourage us to be a people of resilience and love for one another and love for community. We thank you for the media and for every family that is represented here this evening. And we pray that these deliberations would be well accepted to us as families and to those who are viewing us online. Lord, hear us, we pray, and grant us your peace today. Bless this nation, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as we celebrate 45 years of independence. And continue to be with us, we beg, with thanksgiving, through Jesus Christ, our Savior. Amen. Please be seated. Sorry, the national anthem of St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
And love and vow to keep.
Thank you very much. And God bless and keep us true. I want to recognize the presence of Dr. Adrian Fraser, who was once a resident tutor here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines at University of the West Indies, and also one of my favorite teachers of all time, Dr. Michael Denny. And of course, to all of you again, a very special welcome. I can't call all names, but those two gentlemen rest really, really well in my heart. Thank you so much for coming. As well as, of course, Dr. Scott. Not that you are not resting well, but do feel welcome at this particular event. I stand on behalf of and in the capacity as a trustee of the National Trust of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I think I'm serving there now for in excess of 3 years. And probably what drew me to the trust and becoming a lifelong member was this whole idea of preserving our legacy and the historical relevance of things around us. And that's what drew me here this evening, as well as the encouragement of the chair of the National Trust, which is Mrs. Decima Hamilton. Fellow colleagues, fellow trustees as well, welcome. I vaguely remember having come from the rural village of Vermont on the western side of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I think one of our educators is here as well, Mrs. Aldia Dyer. So we share coming from the valley. I remember that there used to be the ringing of a bell on a Sunday. And maybe that is what motivated me to pick up the bell some years later and ring that bell, indicating to all and sundry that there was a message to be told. I must have been probably 7 or 8 years old. And my parents would say, "Look out, the people with the bell coming." And I was fascinated by that. We would stand on the veranda, as we would say, and we would look on. There used to be also a huge cross signifying the crucifixion of Jesus. And those things start to form patterns in my mind. But the thing about it as well, spiritual Baptists who are recognized for carrying a message, so we'd have messengers who would, be up and down at particular points, particular times in the year, and people would say, she has a message or he has a message from God. But ladies and gentlemen, having said all of that, this evening's special presentation, I want to pull a bit from the extract from this book that was written by Dr. Fergus. It says, Against Toleration. What is that, you may ask? But we are informed from the extract, and I'm going to read just a few lines, that against toleration breaks new ground in exposing how administrators of the island of St. Vincent co-opted the political elites and recognized churches and colluded with the British government to deny the spiritual Baptists the right to practice their faith in blatant violation of multiple toleration acts under the British Constitution. I remember having a discussion with my father, John Horace Baylis Frederick, and he mentioned some of these incidents, having come here from Tobago in 1961. And so I'm reading and I'm saying, okay, this has to be relevant to me as a student of history myself. And so, ladies and gentlemen, here's another section that the spiritual Baptists rejected the right of the state to prescribe them, and that many migrated to more conducive polities, but most remained to fight for repeal while continuing to practice their faith, for which untold numbers were arrested, beaten, fined, and imprisoned without the right of appeal. And probably all of this should set within us this framework as to what is against toleration. What's that all about? And again, on behalf of our National Trust, I invite us to sit and not only listen, but we should be able to interact with this text. Again, welcome one and welcome all. To do the analysis for us is our very own Dr. Cleve Scott. He is a lecturer in history in the Department of History and Philosophy. And if there is one thing I love to do, is to listen to Dr. Scott as he speaks to us. Please welcome him to the podium.
Thank you very much, Dr. Charles. I remember my days in the grammar school, loitering at the gate and watching Dr. Charles come through the gate. So you warm my heart always. This evening is indeed a pleasure to be here with a long-standing colleague or comrade, Dr. Claudius Fergus, who I met almost 30 plus years ago as a young postgraduate student before I became part of the teaching setup at the Cable campus. And incidentally, at one time we both taught the history of West Indies cricket, and if I remember well, he was my second examiner. This book, I know Dr. Fergus has been working on it for a number of years. About 6 years ago, if I remember well, we had the usual interdepartmental cross-campus seminar series. That's what it's called. What happens is that the historians at all of the campuses, so St. Augustine, Mona, Caville, we would meet online and we would have presentations. Dr. Denny and Dr. Fraser participated in such seminar about a year or so ago. And Dr. Fergus presented a paper on the spiritual Baptists. At that time, I don't recall him indicating it was going to be part of a book, but we do know that when academics present elements, they do appear later under some kind of publication. This book is well researched, well written. It's unbelievable. It is so orderly for a very senior academic, usually. A good colleague of mine said to me, Cleve, in order to have a good publication record, you do some soft and you do some hard. What that means is that at times you have authority to drop the rigor. It is a very rigorous book. Even the references surprise me, the accuracy and the detail that has gone in. It's a good example if you are a PhD candidate of how to prepare your thesis. The setup of the book is even better. There are 9 chapters. The terminologies that he uses here reminds me of the kind of terminologies my colleague Dr. Michael Denny likes. Chapter 1, the rise of African Caribbean Christianity. If you follow the panel discussion last night, he made a presentation towards the end, which he said, when we say Christianity came to Caribbean, we need to distinguish between European Christianity and African Christianity. Because when I tell people Christianity came from Africa, they tell me, no, talking chauvinist. Right? That is because Columbus came in 1492, and one of the reasons for that was the attempt by the Europeans to take Christianity back into Africa, because by that time Islam had become a dominant religion, but still Christianity existed, right? And Dr. Fergus in this chapter is making the point that there was a form of Christianity that was in the region since the period of enslavement. In the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, because we were a late slave society, and we have to make a distinction. Trinidad and Tobago under the British, St. Vincent and Grenadines under the British. That's a late transformation. So chapter 1 explains this issue of African Christianity in the region. Chapter 2 is the rise of the spiritual Baptist faith. And again, this is kind of groundbreaking because most of the scholarship in the region, most of the scholarship tend to focus on the, let's call it the anthropological aspect, the forms of worship, but not to historicize, not to explain why certain behaviors are present. And Dr. Fergus in this chapter explains how the spiritual Baptists became established in the region. Okay? So the next chapter, which is the issue around toleration. On my way here earlier today, I met a colleague in Kingston, and he was insisting that all religions outside of Christianity, within Christianity, are related to the Church of England. And he kept using the term Church of England. And he said to me, if the late Attorney General Panel Campbell did not put, and I'm using his words, the spiritual Baptist churches on radio, that they would never have gotten onto radio. And I said to him, it is clear that when the Attorney General did that, and they continue to be on the radio, it means that people within St. Vincent and the Grenadines were generally in agreement. And he used the word toleration. So the use of the word toleration in the title of the book and the explanation of this issue of wrong toleration or intoleration sets up the scenario where we must understand that in Europe, and particularly in Britain, toleration was a principle well established since the 17th century. And as we get into the early 20th century, 1912 within the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, where the faith is prohibited, is banned, is a reflection of intoleration. So the issue is, how come after almost 300 years of toleration, we have intoleration? And that is what is explained here. Of course, you have the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which comes later in the 5th chapter, the Shaker Prohibition Ordinance. And in this chapter, he's building on the work of people like the late Ed Cox, also Dr. Fraser. And when I checked the references, I didn't see my name, which means you did not see what I wrote on it. And of course, those of you who listened to the debate in Parliament on the declaration of the holiday would have heard the Prime Minister quoting extensively from what I wrote on the prohibition. But Dr. Fergus did a very good job here, based on the available evidence, to set up and to clarify why the prohibition. And some of it we do know is around economic issues, the rise of the friendly societies, the decline in the attendance to the regular churches, the fact that they are unable to collect a lot of money that they had done in the past, right? And so some of it also has to do with politics and so on. So the Shaker Prohibition Ordinance. Then we go down to the next chapter, chapter 6, and he used a word he called conundrum. Right? Conundrum. Chapter 7 looks at the ordinance in greater detail. And chapter 8 continues to do the same thing, but focusing on the Second World War. Within Caribbean history and world history, the First and Second World War are important moments, because it is between these two wars we have an intensification of some people say black identity, some people say Caribbean identity within the region. I want to go now and draw some specific examples. Now, in the section called The Origin and Evolution of the Spiritual Baptists in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, he makes a point that we have not seen anywhere else, which is that the Baptists must have been present in St. Vincent, particularly on Grand Sable Estate in the Georgetown era. Grand Sable was owned by the Bronx. We historians on the National History Project, especially Dr. Denny, like to call Brong a crook, because he eventually was imprisoned. I don't know if you know the Dr. Fergus. He was imprisoned in Britain for trying to steal more land in Grand Sable. Right, he forged, yes, Brown. Yes, he forged documents to try to get more land, and he was in prison. But Dr. Fergus has shown us that the 600 enslaved people who he brought from the Bahamas, who, again, he tricked because they were supposed to be freed, right? Having fought in the American War of Independence on the side of the British, they were supposed to be freed, and instead of giving their freedom, he re-enslaved them. Yes, so he re-enslaved them. And the entire 600 from all accounts were kept or remained on Grand Sable for a very long time. In fact, in our work in the National History Project, we identify the presence of these 600 people still on Grand Sable as late as the 1850s when they were engaged in protest. But it is very important that Dr. Fergus shows here that they must, and this is his position, they must have had a significant impact in the emergence of the spiritual Baptists. And he explains that this notion of baptism is connected to the American Baptists, and for this practice, for this ritual to be a part of the spiritual Baptists, that must have been the root, and that is what he argues there. Now, I also found it very intriguing that he makes reference to E.T. Joshua, Ebenezer Theodore Joshua, and his association with the Spiritual Baptists. In Trinidad, he also makes specific reference to Uriah Buzz Butler. And I don't know how many of you know that Joshua was a student of Buzz Butler while he was in Trinidad. Both him and Ivy Joshua were students of Buzz Butler. So I would say to you that the work that Dr. Fergus has done, he has given us even greater understanding as to why E.T. Joshua even developed a closer relationship with the Spiritual Baptists. I am suggesting, therefore, that he must have learned something from Buzz Butler within that regard. Dr. Fergus doesn't argue that in the book, but the evidence he shows with the relationship between Buzz Butler and the Spiritual Baptists in Trinidad, and then in St. Vincent with Joshua and the Spiritual Baptists. The late Dr. Kenneth John, he has always said to me that the Spiritual Baptist in St. Vincent was the woman's arm of the PPP, the People's Political Party. Okay. The book, I would say, is an excellent book. It's worth purchasing if you are a student at the CSEC level or the CAPE level. They brings greater clarity on a number of issues and people. For example, Buzz Butler is well known for his work in the trade union movement, and it explains how his connection with the labor movement and the Spiritual Baptists also leads towards the reform of labor, the lifting of the ban in Trinidad and Tobago and St. Vincent and in Grenada. They all had something to do with the reform of the political system, what some people call constitutional development or constitutional reform. But the book makes the point, essentially, that at some point, the British must have recognized the intoleration that they have been practicing was unconstitutional. And so eventually, we have the ban lifted. Thank you very much, Chair.
Let's give a round of applause to our very own Dr. Scott. Thank you so much for helping us to understand a little bit further, a little bit more, I should say, about the book Against Toleration, authored by Dr. Claudius Fergus. If you follow with me on your program, we should have a cultural presentation by our very own Kenneth Vibrating Skates Aline. But before we get to that, I want to recognize the presence of Spiritual Baptists here in our very midst. Could you please stand so that we can give you a round of applause? As our thank you so much. Thank you so much. I also want to recognize the president of the Garifuna Multipurpose Cooperative, who himself, I believe, is a Spiritual Baptist extraordinaire, which is Mr. Newton George. Good. Thank you very much for coming. Okay. At this time, Mr. Aline is here. In 1 minute, he should be with us. Please welcome him in full regalia. Indeed. Wonderful, wonderful. Welcome. And congratulations, sir. All right.
So we must plan collectively for a brighter day. No one knows what's in store for the future. Through dedication, can we get us there? Independence is our mighty soul, and in our path to prosperity. Most is and we will need our bread, our
Oh, thank you so much. One more round of applause for Kenneth Skits Allen. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We also want to recognize the services of members of staff, manager, and staff of the trust. You're very busy behind the scenes, but we thank you so much for keeping things on even keel. Thank you. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, we welcome to the podium the Honorable Curtis King, Minister of Education and National Reconciliation. I also have the honor to say that he was one of my classmates or colleagues at the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Teachers College, Group F2. Please welcome and bless us with your words this evening.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Charles. And I have to recognize Dr. Cleve Scott, my schoolmate, Dr. Claudius Fergus, my former lecturer at UWI. So I'm in good company. And of course, a pleasant good afternoon to all who are gathered here this afternoon. Of course, a special word of welcome to the members of the Spiritual Baptist Movement, I call it, who are present here. Of course, members of the media, who I know always do what is necessary to share our story with the wider audience. First, let me apologize for the absence of the Honorable Prime Minister. He could not make it here this evening. I think actually he is traveling and should be out of state by now. First, I want to congratulate Dr. Fergus and of course the National Trust and all those who are in one way or the other associated with this project. I call it a project because producing a book is not an easy task, and especially one of historical significance. You have to do a lot of research and you have to get it right, so to speak. And the process is indeed detailed, sometimes confusing, sometimes very challenging, and you have all these things to deal with. But when you have the finished product, it is always satisfying. I recognize that we are in the month of independence. We just had our cultural ambassador, the Vibrating Skates, still doing his thing, still singing fresh like 1979. Oh yes. But the month of October is quite significant for us. As we all know, it's the month when we say that we made that break, so to speak, or the commencement of the break from our colonial domination, and basically began the road, if you like, for political independence. I speak about that significant event that some persons call the 1935 uprising, some call it a riot, whatever name you call it. The fact is, 1935, we had quite a significant event. And of course, this is the month of our independence. It is also the month when the spiritual Baptists were put under what we would call, in present-day language, stress. Because I believe it was on the 1st of October back in 1912 when the colonial authorities at the time banned the spiritual Baptist religion. And there, for a long period of time, the movement basically had to function underground, although in our context, where the communities were very supportive, even though it was underground, it was very much present and prominent among our working class people. But I don't want to speak too long, except to say, and I always make this point, that since 1979, we are actually on a program to correct some of the difficulties that we inherited from our colonial past, a program to fill some of the gaps that we inherited from our colonial past, a program to remove some of the deficits that we inherited from our colonial past. And it has been an engaging exercise. I remember one class, Dr. Fergus, I never forget that class. We basically were discussing in that class whether or not the slave project, the slavery project, we could call it that, or let us put it in its widest terms, colonialism, whether or not the brutality of colonialism was in fact more impactful than the softer aspect of colonialism. That is to say, the knowledge inculcation that was practiced. The other softer issues where persons were frightened into doing things that the colonial masters wanted. And this evening is in fact very appropriate because with the publication of this book, what we are having is the continuing attempt to put and to tell the story of our own existence in our own terms so that it could serve us as a people in good stead as we seek to reclaim our historical evolution and our heritage and celebrate them also. And so we can't do those things if we don't have the historical knowledge. And what is happening this afternoon is the continuation of the presentation of our historical knowledge. And by yet a next author. Yes, he might be Trinidadian by nationality, but he is very much a Caribbean national. And in this project, because we all experience colonialism at one time or the other, we are all in it together. And we have to accept and welcome help from every quarter. But I must tell you, in case you don't know, Dr. Fergus is very much a Vincentian, having established roots right here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, right? Where he found his love of his life. Okay? So I'm saying that this is a very important event, and I really want to congratulate all those who have a part to play in this very important event. And we look forward for more presentations and publication of our history. I can't live without saying and reminding you that this government is committed to that glorious past, not so much because of it being our past story, but more so to take from it the lessons that are required for our road forward. And that is the reason why the government some years ago took the decision to have a comprehensive history, not the only one, others would come after, but at least a comprehensive history of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And we have engaged, as you know, 4 prominent historians to do the job. One of them is here, and you heard from him earlier, Dr. Cleve Scott. So once again, I congratulate you and hope that those who are gathered here and those who would hear about the book after would actually purchase a copy of the book and use it to help you to put together our story, which is so important as we move forward in these times. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Another round of applause for him, please. Thank you so much. Well, Dr. Claudius Fergus, you have heard it. You know, so as we would say locally, the ball is now in your court. Yes? We invite you to respond. Lecturer, historian, author, Caribbean man, good man, we welcome you.
Thank you, Chair. Greetings to everyone, and thanks for coming out to this book launch. I would just refer to two things that my colleague here referred to. Not to challenge what he has said, that's not appropriate, although I do agree with your evaluation. He wanted to know when the idea of the book took shape, I think, because he mentioned that I presented a paper at a cross-campus seminar. Yes, I did. In fact, I also presented papers at other forums. But up to that time, I had no inclination whatsoever of producing a book. But even at that seminar, I was persuaded by colleagues in the department, why not, publish this thing in an article, in a journal? I said, I am not ready. I don't think I'm ready. But by the time I was ready, it was too much for a journal. So I decided I had to extend the study into a full monograph, which I did. Because the original intention was just to deal with the prohibition. But having dealt thoroughly with the prohibition, I realized I had to deal with the repeal as well in order to complete the story. And therefore, the research continued on and on. By the way, the cross-campus seminar was my baby. As one of the things I launched as a head of department, I thought the campuses were operating too separately, and I tried to bring the students together. In fact, Cave Hill sent one student to St. Augustine. We sent one up, but things broke down afterwards. So the idea was to bring the postgrad students together to share their research with other postgrad students, and that the faculty members would have a platform, in case they're preparing to publish a paper, they can have it tested out that way. And we launched it. There were great challenges at the time. Even Zoom that we used, we had to pay for it. Yeah, we had to pay Ministry of Education, the Faculty of Education. They alone had a Zoom account. We had to pay them every time we did a seminar. We had to pay $500. So now, all those things are so free and so many other platforms available. So my hope is that that seminar would continue and help particularly young scholars to continue to develop. Yeah, now the spiritual Baptist prohibition wasn't something unique or peculiar to the Caribbean. I think a lot of people think that, somehow the colonial government picked on the spiritual Baptist. But there were many precedents for prohibition of Christians in the Caribbean. It was a long history of persecution of Christians. Methodists were persecuted. African Baptists were persecuted. In Jamaica, for example, you had quite a few persecutions. The person who founded the Jamaica Baptist Church, George Leale, some say Lyle, he was imprisoned. And some people were deported. So it was a long continuing struggle against a colonial regimes across the Caribbean that did not want the Anglican Church in particular. But the Anglican Church often shared status with the Roman Catholic Church. They did not want that to be disturbed. So those persecutions continued. And after emancipation, the Methodists somehow found an alliance with the Anglican and the Catholic Church, but mostly the Anglican Church, in not wanting their own enclaves to be disturbed. And so, in a sense, they became an ally against African Christianity, in a sense. So they were no longer persecuted after emancipation. In fact, they were co-opted in that project of what actually became mental slavery. It was a project of mental slavery. So as physical slavery ended, the project in mental slavery was intensified. And all the churches were co-opted in that. So it was virtually a culture war in the post-emancipation period. And the Methodists found themselves co-opted by the state against the emerging African Christian denomination, whatever name it was called then. So the important thing is that it was a long history, a culture within the Caribbean of persecution. And then at 1855 it was supposed to end, because there was a seminal legislation which was passed, the Places of Worship and Registration Act, that was supposed to end that. It did not, except against the black Christian churches. Not all of them, because the Black Baptist Church, there was a Black Baptist Church in Trinidad from 1815. They were never persecuted. In Jamaica, the original Black Baptist Church wasn't persecuted. But the elements that transition out of those, like Pocomania and Revival Zionists, they were persecuted. In Trinidad, the Spiritual Baptist was persecuted. And that's because mainly the original Baptist Church wasn't what we call a proselytizing church. They weren't going about aggressively to spread their faith. They were mainly isolated where they started. It was the Spiritual Baptists through the mission. They got, dreams to go on mission and so on. And they were all over the colony, and people were attracted to them, and that is what scared, well, one of the main things that scared the established churches, because they were a missionary church, whereas the original Baptist church would have limited their missionary activity to the period of slavery, and after that, they seem to have left that role to the London churches, because they did invite the London Baptist Church to come in to help them, and they were not seen as a threat. So that's one of the reasons. But enough on that. So you need to, as have been suggested, get a copy of the book. And one more thing I should say: the title of the book, Against Toleration. I played around with a lot of titles. But that toleration is not the normal meaning of the word toleration. I don't tolerate that kind of behavior and so on. No, this is a legal terminology. It's in law. The Toleration Act was a specific legislation that was passed in the year 1689 to say these denominations have almost equal right with the Anglican Church, but not these and so on. Over the next 200 years, amendments were made on a continuing basis, expanding the rights for people to practice their faith. So that is the understanding of this. And by 1855, as I said, all faiths, not Christian faiths, all faiths, no matter what, were now legally entitled to practice their faith openly. So Against Toleration refers specifically to that act. The violation of that act, which was in the British law a constitutional law. Okay? Right. So it's making kind of warm here. So before I go into my honor list that I have here, I would like to invite anyone who may have had an advanced copy of the book. Some people have been privileged with some copies. If you want to ask me any question at all, feel free. I invite you to ask. Even if you didn't have a copy of the book and you want to ask me a question, I would entertain the question. So anybody wants to find out anything, just indicate and you'll get the opportunity. Yes. Of Gideon Murray. Yeah. Okay, so the system of governance in the Windward Islands, because St. Vincent, as you would all know, was one of a group of colonies called the Windward Islands. The structure was kind of divided. You know, the main colony for judicial matters was Grenada. The Anglican Church eventually was based here, so that the bishop was based here, and St. Lucia was second in line. So if the governor went on leave, the administrator would, from St. Lucia, would become the acting governor. So you had a governor that some people call Governor General, but the others were not called governors, they were called administrators. So St. Vincent had administrators. The first time that the attempt to prohibit the spiritual Baptists came up was in 1903 under Administrator Cameron. And Cameron attempted twice to prohibit the spiritual Baptists. Almost the same legislation, just slight differences. The first time it was vetoed right here. The Chief Justice of Grenada, well, of the Federation, recommended to the governor, you cannot do that. There's no way this can pass muster in the colonial office. It's a violation of the British Constitution. In 1908, he produced another one. This one reached to England. The colonial office agreed they cannot allow such legislation to be sanctioned, and therefore they vetoed it. Now, there was a memo that had been sent out since 1809 warning all colonial governments that they must not legislate in terms of religious rights before sending the bill to England for review. And that's why that bill reached England before it was brought to the legislature. Murray, Gideon Murray, took over from Cameron in 1909. He took over from Cameron. Cameron was transferred to St. Lucia. Now, those two characters are interconnected in this story. He was transferred to St. Lucia as administrator, some say commissioner. Commissioners seem to be a little higher status than mere administrator, but he was there. And Murray had been in the colonial office since 1907. In 1907, he was appointed permanent under Secretary of State. That means anything coming into the Secretary of State, he would first have access to that. It's kind of like a PS today, a parliamentary secretary. Now, he must have seen the legislation that Cameron drafted, must have, because that was the channel that it passed. So he must have known about the legislation, the attempt, and the recommendation by colonial office officials was that if this thing is to pass muster, you got to expunge all terms, all expressions that indicate it is a religious group that you are targeting. So they actually recommended, and it was even suggested since 1903, you know, that you cannot pass unless you expunge even the term religion. In the colonial office, that was the reason, because Cameron insisted this is a religion. The Shakers is a religion, and he kept the word religion, and they vetoed it because of that. Now, when Murray came, Murray seemed to have come with an intention. I don't have evidence, but he said so, that he long desired to ban the Baptists. And that desire probably began when he was in the colonial office. Now, a number of people who I call the gatekeepers of the constitutions left around the same time, 1905, 1906, 1907. So the people who were blocking the government from going ahead with prohibition, they were transferred, some retired and so on. Murray brought in some new people, put some of them in the Legislative Council. For example, the chief of police was never on the Executive Council. Murray put him there. And these, in other words, what you had was a prohibitionist element in the Executive Council and the Legislative Council installed by Murray, because Murray at that time, St. Vincent was a crown colony, and the governor could appoint, had the right and obligation to appoint anybody. All of the officers, so some were in the Executive Council, some were in the Legislative Council. Nobody was elected at that time. All were nominated. So he packed the council with people who were favorable to prohibition. That's the short of that story. And when he brought the bill, he drafted the bill after a lot of public propaganda, mainly by the church, the newspapers, and so on. But in terms of the law, he drafted this bill just at the time that the governor was about to go on vacation, his annual vacation, which generally lasts about 3 months. The governor didn't see the draft of the bill. The person who saw the bill and talked to him was the same Cameron. Cameron was appointed acting governor. So you see, the picture starts to build up. Cameron now was acting governor. Cameron wanted to ban the spiritual Baptists since 1903. He was now acting governor. Now his duty was to tell Murray, you cannot bring that bill to the Legislative Council. It must be viewed by me, the acting governor, and the acting governor had the obligation to send it to England. However, he allowed Murray to table the legislation. The legislation was passed and implemented immediately. You know, they would have gazetted the law and implemented it immediately, and then it was sent to England. So by the time it reached England, that's where the conundrum comes in, because these people now found themselves reviewing a law that was already in effect. And yet the colonial office had the power to veto the legislation, because they had done that with several legislation. They dilly-dallied over it, and eventually they allowed it to remain in effect for a year, after which they will review for a final decision. Now, Murray got away with it because Murray's brother was in Parliament. Two of his brothers were in Parliament. The Undersecretary of State knew him personally in South Africa. A lot of the officials who reviewed the ordinance were Murray's colleagues in South Africa between 1902 and 1905. All of them somehow were in South Africa around the time of the Boer War. Those of you who know the Boer War, 1899 to 1902. All of them were there, so they were colleagues. A number of them worked in the colonial office at the same time Murray was there. Murray was even their boss. So what you had was officials, subordinates to Murray, who was an aristocrat, and the aristocratic culture operated in a way, you know, if you understand the African respect for seniority, for elders, and so on, that kind of deep and abiding respect. So there was no way that they would have recommended veto. Although they criticized the document, some of them said this thing is in violation of the Constitution. What should we do? They even recommended that Murray be upbraided by the colonial office. And yet they said this is a brash young administrator. He needs to be held in check. And yet they allow the legislation to pass. So that is the Murray we are talking about, his connections. Now, the spiritual Baptists in Trinidad were prohibited too, but they were only prohibited because it was prohibited here. The governor at the time, Governor Chancellor, had no such political or collegial connections in the colonial office. There's no way the colonial office would have passed legislation. So what Trinidad did was to make a carbon copy of the legislation here. The only words they changed it from shakers to shouters and the dates. But it was virtually the same. So having passed it already, they had no choice but to pass this one. Otherwise, vetoing that one meant they would have to go and veto the St. Vincent legislation as well. So basically, that's the role of Murray in the prohibition of the spiritual Baptists. So Murray-Cameron connection. You need to keep them together. Yes, so currently all over the Caribbean, the CARICOM Reparations Commission have been mandated by the heads of government of CARICOM to review the names of places, statues, monuments that celebrate what we call colonial criminals, people who committed crimes against humanity. And the prohibition of spiritual Baptists I recognize as a crime against humanity. The persecution of the spiritual Baptists under the conditions which they were persecuted, and charging them fines which were so exorbitant. When you calculate those fines in today's money value, you wonder what it is they were trying to do. Definitely was to cripple the movement financially. If you equate those fines, imagine in those days people used to work for $1.50, $2 a week and so on, 25 cents a day. And you charge people hundreds of dollars fines in some instances. So it's either they were intent on breaking them financially or ensuring that they were imprisoned, which of course would threaten the integrity of their family, you know, their children and all of that. It's a crime against humanity, and me personally, I would recommend that Murray's name be expunged from any recognition like that, and replaced perhaps with one of the spiritual Baptists who took up the fight against prohibition. You have so many of them. But then again, I'm not a citizen yet. So I hope I don't get trouble leaving, when I'm leaving and somebody say, what is it you were saying against the country there? Right, so any other person wants to ask anything? Yes, Dr. Denny and gentleman in the back. Dr. Denny? independent, I am not sure. But I believe once you decide that you cannot continue to practice the tenets of a particular faith, and you break away from that particular, call that one mainstream, that you are independent, even if you continue to collaborate. But in the case of the spiritual Baptist, it was different. A spiritual Baptist, to be independent in the way I think I understand you, would have meant having the authority to conduct marriages within your faith, to bury with, your members within your faith, to be able to establish church, schools and get your children within your faith also registered in those schools. None of those things could be done because the state would not grant licenses to the spiritual Baptists to conduct marriages. They could not say they're not recognizing them before the prohibition, but they would not grant them marriages. That's how they controlled it. So if you wanted to marry, either you would have had to have your own marriage ceremony, which could have been done. The Hindus did that. They continued traditional Hindu marriages. But there was a negative side to that, in that they branded you, the state branded your children as bastards. And that was a major stigma on children. They would not allow you into the schools unless you were baptized. So the Catholics run schools, Anglican run schools, and so on. That was one way of converting people, by not allowing others to be able to baptize, give them the right to baptize in a recognized church, to conduct marriages and so on. So that was one of the problems you had. That if you baptize, now remember, the spiritual Baptists practiced adult baptism. But when you went to primary school, your child ought to have been baptized already. And therefore, it forced you into the European churches, either the Methodist, the Catholic, or the Anglican, the main ones. But by the beginning of the 19th century, you had a whole set of new ones that were coming, most of them coming from North America. But you had a lot of new ones coming. So that was the challenge that they had. How do you get your child into school early enough, when one of the criteria was that the child had to be baptized and to have a baptismal name? So that was part of the problem. So the church could not have been independent in the sense I think I understood you, because the law would not allow them. So spiritual Baptists were Anglicans, they were Catholics, they were Methodists. They continued to move within the churches for a very, very long time. Now, with respect to African religions, a number of African religions came from Africa. In the two classes we can see. One would have been what we call broadly the traditional African religions, like the Orisha, what some people call Shango, like Voodoo. Those would have come out of Africa. And you also had Islam. A lot of people don't realize Islam, there are more Muslims, African Muslims, than you have Muslims that are in India. In Trinidad, once you say a Muslim, people tend to think you're talking about an East Indian person. When I remember the first time I went to Ghana, to Nigeria, I was in Nigeria, and somebody asked me if they had Muslims in Trinidad. I said yes. They presumed that it was Africans in Trinidad who were Muslims. When I told them most of the Muslims were Indians, they couldn't understand how the Indians were Muslims and not the Africans. So Africa had been Islamic long before India, long before Pakistan. The first wave of expansion of Islam was into Africa In fact, Muslims would tell you even before the expansion began that the Prophet Muhammad had his family living in Ethiopia, and to begin a pocket of Muslims in Ethiopia. So one of the oldest places of Islam is in Ethiopia. Just as one of the oldest places of Christianity is in Ethiopia as well. So we had these religions. Islam was practiced in Trinidad by Africans in the early 19th century. They had their own mosques and so on. And then the Indians came and dominated the scene, and then the African Americans spread a different branch of Islam back again from the 1970s. So the Islam that we have in Trinidad now among the African population is the American brand of Islam. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah, so African religions in Trinidad, and I understand there was also elements of that here. There had to be, you know, what they call Shango. My brother, I remember my elder brother, would never miss a Shango feast. Now, he wasn't an Orisha, but he would never miss a Shango feast. And so people, you know, the spiritual Baptists also kept the Orisha very close to them. There's a very, very close relationship in Trinidad between the Orisha and the spiritual Baptists, because they understand that a lot of the religion, the spiritual Baptist religion, is syncretic with particularly Yoruba, but also the religion of Congo as well, but very strong Yoruba elements. And a lot of the early proponents of spiritual Baptist church were Yoruba as well. So that element entered into the church. Yeah. By the way, last night I heard Dr. Scott say that he is convinced that St. Vincent was the foundation of the spiritual Baptist church. I lean towards that as well, because by the end of the 19th century, the church was already well formed in terms of all of the rules, the spiritual rules, the doctrines, and so on. And it was a common thing in Trinidad. You had exactly the same rules and doctrines and titles, you know, in Grenada. So it had to have a common origin. And I would lean towards St. Vincent, because the Vincentians were migrating up and down between Trinidad and St. Vincent since the 1840s, and therefore either they would have brought the religion to Trinidad, or what developed in Trinidad they would have taken back, but that St. Vincent element is foundational to the spiritual Baptist church. Yes, there's a gentleman in the back. Well, I heard some of what you said, so you'll forgive me if I don't answer to all of what you said. But the reference to baptism is a very important one that distinguishes the spiritual Baptist from other Baptists. The sprinkling aspect of the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, that is well known. But the Baptists, European Baptists, practice immersion, that is docking you underwater, your complete body. They practice immersion. But the spiritual Baptists, beginning in Jamaica with George Leary, started a new doctrine called baptism by living water. So it was not just immersing under the water had to be living water, meaning the water had to be moving. And that's why they baptize in the sea and in the rivers. They would not baptize someone in a pond. The water had to be living water. And that idea of living water may have come out of Central West Africa, as far as my research tells me. I don't want to go into details now. I believe people might be getting even exhausted sitting there in this heat. But that aspect of it is African. So an African element added to the European doctrine of baptism as practiced by the London Baptists, which is a Baptist that would have influenced the rise of African American Baptists. And that element would have given rise to the baptism of the spiritual Baptist. So it's a different element. Yes, it's adult baptism. Yes, it involves immersion. But the third element is living water. That is what I could tell you. Okay? The marriage aspect of it, I didn't hear that too well. So you'll forgive me. When we meet outside, maybe you can raise that with me. So at this point, let me say thanks to first of all, the National Trust, the chairperson and her team for hosting this event this evening. Thank you very much, Mrs. Hamilton, and the team, including Dr. Charles. Yes, thank you very much. Now, I want to say a special thanks to the Spiritual Baptists for coming out this evening. The book is dedicated to you. It was not, I would say, a lifelong effort. After my first book, which I published in 2013, Revolutionary Emancipation, I did not think I would have written another book so soon. But the issues here were really intriguing. It was really intriguing. Kept me researching and researching and researching until I decided that, you know, but partly what motivated me too, I will tell you, wasn't just to write the book, you know, but do something to a document, to create a document that spiritual Baptists could use to address the British government and demand reparations. Yeah, and I ended the book on that note. So in a sense, it's a reparatory document. It's a call for reparatory justice for the spiritual Baptists. And since the local government was the one instrumental in it, Mr. Curtis King, your government. Yes, you have done something. I think it's fantastic to award a public holiday because that builds the national consciousness about the spiritual Baptists. It would even build the consciousness of the spiritual Baptists about their own history and movement. But the government needs to do more. It is not your government that banned them, but it is the government of this place that banned them. And therefore, the government has a responsibility, the local government, St. Vincent and the Grenadines government, to do more than that. Yeah, I want to thank the caterers who have prepared something quite delicious looking for you after, so don't leave in a hurry when we're finished. It's customary at a launch, of course, to recognize that a publication is not a one-man affair, although you may see one name on it, but it's a collective effort of the publisher, the reviewers, most of them you don't know, but the reviewers, in-house editors. So I also want to thank Ian Randall, the publisher, and his team who worked to ensure that this is a very excellent piece of work. You know, there are some books when you're afraid to bend them like this because the pages start separating. This one, the pages won't separate, not for years to come, unless you deliberately want to rip the book apart. So this is an excellent production, the physical book, and of course the editing of the book. I say thanks to them. I want to acknowledge that quite a lot of the work that I did, I was standing on the shoulders of people like Dr. Fraser, Dr. Cox, who recently passed away. I don't know if anybody knows Sheena Boer. She did some excellent work on St. Vincent in a book called Race and Gender, and Race, Color, and Gender. I thought that was very interesting. If you study the Spiritual Baptist, you should read her because she deals extensively with the 19th century. A lot of religious issues are covered there. Sheena Boer, I don't know her. I never knew her before that, and I don't know much of her work after that. There was a lecturer at UWI, a Norwegian, who became a spiritual Baptist, married a spiritual Baptist from Tobago and converted. And she has done some pretty good work. I also would have benefited from her work. Marit Ford is her name, Marit Ford. I would have perhaps asked her to review the book, but then when I checked on her, she had remigrated to Norway, where she's lecturing now. So there are some people that would have made some substantial contribution to my knowledge of the spiritual Baptist situation in St. Vincent and even in Trinidad. And of course, there were a number of people that I interviewed in respect of the faith itself, in respect of the friendly societies which were dominated by the spiritual Baptists by the end of the 19th century and played a role in their prohibition. I can't go into that now, but there were people that contributed to my understanding of the role of the friendly societies in the wider society. I want to say thanks to all others who would have contributed by way of knowledge, including my mother, who would have also made me understand a lot about the rites and rituals and the doctrines of the spiritual Baptists, particularly about mourning, that aspect of mourning. My mother was the first one that gave me the knowledge I needed, but there were others who actually went on the mourning ground who would have shared some aspects of that knowledge with me, and I wish to say thanks to all of them. I thank my wife who is here. She's right there. And she also was a researcher, encouraging me with knowledge about the spiritual Baptists here in St. Vincent. Thank you very much. And of course, you, the attendees, I want to say thanks for coming out and enduring. I haven't seen anybody get up to leave, but I don't want to stretch your patience. Right, thank you for coming out. Thank you for support. The book costs $100, and you can get it endorsed. There are a number of books there. There are some people who would have ordered books, I have your names stuck into some of those. So if you're here, you would collect your book. And before I end, I want to say that next May 21st, I hope I'm here to participate in the first annual public holiday of the Spiritual Baptists. Yes. So I want anybody from the National Archives here? Or the National Library? Okay, I have a complimentary copy of the book for the... You can collect it. Yes. Okay, so Mr. King, you can collect this book. And yeah, I was hoping the Prime Minister would be here for me to present this book to him. And since his minister is here, is it possible for you to deliver this? So this is for the Prime Minister. You have to leave. Okay. We can get it to you. Give Curator. Yeah. So listen. Come. I have to sign the Prime Minister's one. I didn't realize everything. So I'll get it onto you, right? I'll get it onto you. Okay. So thank you very much. Yeah. And Prime Minister Dr. Rowley has a copy as well. I was hoping he would travel with it so they can discuss on the plane going to Chogam, because the CARICOM Reparations Commission has decided that Chogam must address the issue of reparations at that meeting. By the way, I'm the chairman of the National Reparations Commission of Trinidad and Tobago, and also because of that position, I'm also on the CARICOM Reparations Commission. And we submitted proposals for discussion at Chogam with respect to reparations, so you should hear some things coming out. Of course, the King would be there, the Prime Minister of England would be there, and they're the two principal targets. There should be a civil society element from the Caribbean also going. The conference is this week. Next week? Yeah, next week. So people are traveling already because it's a long way to get there. So I was hoping, they might have some discussions as well, because, as I said, while reparations for the Spiritual Baptists is not in the 10-point plan of CARICOM, but it should be an additional point for those, particularly in those places where the crime took place, like in St. Vincent. So thank you all for coming out, and if you are purchasing a book, I'll be there to endorse the book for you. And otherwise, we have some refreshments that you can partake of before you leave. Thank you once more, and hopefully there would be books available at the bookstores, local bookstores. I am negotiating with them to get some copies, and so that you can continue to have, yes.
At least two more items, a cultural presentation and vote of thanks. Okay. All right, so you go right ahead, and we invite, thank you very much. Give a round of applause to Dr. Fergus for his presentation this evening. Thank you so much. We are indeed richer for it. And now, ladies and gentlemen, fasten your seatbelts for a cultural presentation by the Rose Hall Drummers. After that, we are going to be having the final vote of thanks by Mrs. Dora James. But just want to say a quick word On behalf of the trust, we want to say a very special thanks to Dr. Cleve Scott. Not only is he a historian and Vincentian, but he has supported us tremendously behind the scenes. And Dr. Scott, on behalf of the National Trust, we say thank you very much for your financial and other support to us. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the Rose Hall Drummers. Thank you so much, Rose Hall Drummers. Thank you so much. And now, Mrs. James, please, to bring the curtains down on this evening's program.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to endorse all that Dr. Fergus said when he was giving his thanks, and to continue by thanking the chair for a job well done. To Dr. Scott, Cleve Scott, who made it here to ensure that the analysis was done, and he did a very good job to the extent that if you didn't have an interest in purchasing a book, he set the tone, he whet the appetite. And then that was also endorsed by Dr. Fergus, going into all this about the Baptists and so on and so forth. And I hope all the Baptists who are here would go right to the table to purchase a book, because you need to be able to have that documentation. He is urging us to do work, and so you need that to back up your story and to back up your to be evidence when you're making your demands. We had Vibrating Skates, our cultural ambassador. We want to thank him, even though he's not here. He did an excellent job, had us singing. I really wanted to get up and dance, and I was looking for somebody to join me. And also drummers are coming down to Kingston to participate in this exercise. To all those other persons who made a special contribution to make this their success, we want to thank you very much. And at this time, I want to close by giving God the thanks. Not that he is last, but to sum up, that great is God's faithfulness. And that is why all of us could have been here today. So thank you very much, and do enjoy the snack that follows. Blessings.
Thank you for thanking us. Good night, everybody.